Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alpha Woolen, and I'm your host this evening for Inside Scoop. Project 2025, one of the most controversial, if not concerning, pieces of policy initiative to face voters this general election. Tonight, we are going to talk about Project 2025, and tonight we have with us the president of the Virginia chapter of the NAACP, Reverend Cozy Bailey. Reverend Bailey, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Alpha. I really appreciated being here with you.
Yes, this is such an important piece of information to talk about. Everyone's heard it all over the news, and everyone should be concerned. But I'm hoping that with voters and viewers watching tonight, they'll have an informed perspective about what exactly this policy initiative is about.
Good, and I'm glad to be able to be a part of that. As you know, I'm the president of the Virginia NAACP, and one of the things that the NAACP is stalwart, we are just magnifying our efforts this year, is voter registration, education, and mobilization. And I think that a discussion and understanding about Project 2025 is part of that education piece.
Absolutely. So I do want us to get into exactly the NAACP's efforts around that voter mobilization and education. But before we get into that, how did you get to be the president of the Virginia chapter of the NAACP?
Well, I have been a social justice advocate all of my life. Even though I spent 23 years in the Marine Corps helping to protect our country and our ideals, deep within me was a sense of helping other people. It probably started during my youth when my mother was a block unit organizer with the Urban League, and then a young man came to the house, talked to her, and she believed that he should be in Congress. And so she sent me to help knock doors with that young man. That young man was retired Congressman Bill Clay, one of the architects of the Congressional Black Caucus. Wow. A few years later, short story, I had a desire to attend the Naval Academy. Bill Clay had been elected, and I talked to him, and I was his second appointee to the United States Naval Academy.
Wow.
20 years hence, he told me if I was ever stationed at the Pentagon, to come by and see him, and I was actually able to do that. So Bill Clay and my mother just put this sense, again, of social justice advocacy in my heart, and it's been there my entire life.
Wow. And then so fast forward, you joined the NAACP, and then you go through that process to become president.
Yes, first I became president of our branch, our unit in Prince William County. I'm still serving there, dual roles now as the president of the local branch. But last year, as I served on the state's political action committee, several folks came to me and asked me if I would be interested in running for president. Our previous president had completed 2 terms. So I decided to put my hat in the ring, so to speak, and here I am. In November of 2023, I was elected state president.
Fantastic.
And it's been a joy. It's been a labor of love, but it's been a joy.
Well, thank you for taking the time out to come to the show and talk about something so important as Project 2025. And it's interesting that you mention the historic connection that you have with the policymaker. Just from your perspective, what is the relationship, or do you see a correlation between what's written in Project 2025 and perhaps what you've experienced or previous iterations of similar policy initiatives?
Absolutely. You know, by the definition that you see in a dictionary, the Project 2025 document is in fact a manifesto. It reminds me in many ways of another manifesto that I have studied and we can look at in history. It was written early in my life, 1956, by members of Congress. It was called the Southern Manifesto. It was written specifically and solely to give a guide to how to pull back from some of the recent legislation and Supreme Court decisions that had been made that integrated racially public places in the United States. Most importantly, it was a result of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, which led to and happened at the same time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which I think is really important, for people to understand, this concept called massive resistance. Massive resistance, for those who don't know, was the concerted effort by many southern states, but primarily Virginia was one that was preeminent and actually fighting against integration of schools to the point that public schools were shut down in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have a good friend of mine who was negatively impacted by that because the schools were shut down and only private schools were operating in his county. His family moved him to North Carolina so that he could attend public schools there. That was a result of the Southern Manifesto. As we look into Project 2025, I think that we will see some parallels within this manifesto as well.
And that is hugely concerning. That is a perfect example of how consequential these policy initiatives are. Actually, according to the purpose, which is written on Project 2025 on their website, it says their purpose is, it says it is not enough for conservatives to win elections. This is a direct quote from the website. If we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left, we need both a governing agenda and the right people in place ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration. This is the goal of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. So they are saying, they're outlining that this is their goal, to roll back, as you mentioned, the strides that we've made within our democracy to make America a place where everyone can live. Just from my observations, this policy initiative is putting in place or trying to create an America where a certain type of person lives freely.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm reminded when I also read the stated purpose of this document, and it talks about conservatism. When I was a child, conservatism meant something totally different than what it seems to mean today. Conservative seemed to mean in those days conservative from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. And also, it meant to literally help all people. Again, the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization, but we're absolutely a political organization. So we are very much involved in the political process. Things have evolved for Black people in this country in that right after I was born in the mid-50s, Black people began to change their allegiance from one political party to another. But Black people were overwhelmingly voting Republican during my father's and my mother's time. But that shifted because the values of the Republican Party began to change, as did the values of the Democratic Party, which gives rise to why one of the quotes that I learned, as a matter of fact, from Congressman Clay, is that Black people, we have to understand as we enter into and participate in the political process that we don't have permanent friends, we don't have permanent enemies, but what we do have is permanent interests. And this document talks about things that are counter to what our permanent interests are.
Absolutely. I think the Southern, what did you call it? The Southern?
The Southern Manifesto.
You said, when we were talking before, you mentioned that was signed by 90% Democrats?
90% of the signees were Democrats, right? And that was part of the shift
right.
that took place as that manifesto was largely unsuccessful. A couple of the Democrats who did not sign it began to lead the Democratic Party in a different light. One of those was a senator from Texas by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson, who of course was a hero for civil rights legislation during the 60s.
Wow, and I think that could be a whole nother conversation, but I think the conversation around that shift is very important. I know that there are voices that criticize, and I'll just say as a side note that Project 2025 will not only affect Black people, it will affect everyone. But I think specifically to this conversation about, because the Black vote is consequential, it is powerful, there is this criticism that it doesn't make sense for Black people to vote Democratic because of a historical perspective, but I think what's missing from that conversation is the shift.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. This document affects all people. In my estimation, it affects all right-thinking people.
Right.
And we should always be focused. We as American citizens should always be focused on voting for ideas and ideals, and not for persons or personalities. And so we have to look at this document and understand that it in fact does other a lot of us. And that term I mean other. It excludes people instead of including people. Some of the language in there, as we'll go through, is surreptitious, and you have to really read it and understand it to pull that out.
Absolutely. So before we get into the kind of the meat and potatoes of this document, I found it really interesting. I think there are over 50 stakeholders, 50 contributors to this document. There might be a bit more, but I found a couple of them really interesting. The Frederick Douglass Foundation, the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute, the NRA, which doesn't necessarily surprise me. And there are a couple of companies listed in this: Booz Allen Hamilton, and IBM Consulting. I wonder if they know
Me too.
Yeah, I wonder if they know that some of the contributors are listing their company affiliation. But just from you being a church leader, how do you reconcile the fact that this manifesto is created by mainly Christian organizations? How do you reconcile being a church leader and the role of Christian principles within this document?
Well, I think, Alpha, that some of the folks probably have not read the entire document. The Christian principles that are contained in there talk to some things that, again, going back to what the old definition of conservative meant. And as I say to my wife and my son all the time, this is one of those situations where two things can be true at the same time. Some of those organizations, I believe, are looking at some of the aspects within the document that are not exclusive, because it's not totally exclusive, and probably focused on those things. But the truth is that the document taken in its entirety is in fact exclusionary. And so we have to look at it that way when we look at, reconciling from a Christian or church standpoint.
Absolutely. Please make sure you don't go anywhere as we continue our conversation with Reverend Cozy Bailey, President of the Virginia chapter of the NAACP on Project 2025.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. Already posted it.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. All I was scared of, very sad and all that I could do was remember you. You know I usually say no, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right.
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you,
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for coming back and joining us here on Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation with Reverend Cozy Bailey, the president of the Virginia chapter of the NAACP, talking about the impacts and consequences of Project 2025. Reverend Bailey, thank you so much for showing up and helping us understand this document. When we left, we were talking about some of the interesting stakeholders and contributors to this document. But before we really get into those 4 pillars, I want to make sure our audience understands the difference between being partisan and being political.
Right, great question, and thank you for bringing that back up. So when I say that the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization, what that means is that we do not get behind any political party, neither one of the main 2, Republican or Democrat, or some of the others, Independents or Green Party or what have you. But in fact, the NAACP was formed to be involved in political activities. And so when we talk about what our ideology is, some of the things that we advocate for from a policy standpoint, we are deeply involved in the political process in order to bring about change when change is needed, or to maintain those things that we already have on the books when they come under attack. So we are a political organization because we are involved in the political process, but we don't do that via the Democratic Party, Republican Party, Independents, or Green Party, or anything else.
I think that's really important. One of the frustrations that you hear from people, especially now with the general election being so politically charged, you'll hear someone say, oh, I don't like to get into politics. Where you can't. If you drive your car on, clean roads, or you have clean water, or you have a child enrolled in public school, that decision was made due to a political process. But I think that it's important for people to understand there's a difference between being partisan and being political.
And Alfred, you are absolutely right. That brings another thing to mind. The form of government that we have here in this country is, we loosely call it a democracy. In fact, the United States is a democratic republic. And that's something for a political science class. But either way that you look at it, for a democracy to work, when we talk about a government of the people and by the people, it means that the people have to be involved. And it's not just involvement on election day. It is constantly being involved and talking to those people that we have elected to make sure that they don't forget what they promised and what we expect of them. To make a democracy work, it takes work.
That's right.
It takes continual involvement.
Absolutely. And some of that work, or a lot of that work, is becoming aware
Yes.
of what policymakers have in mind for this country, for you, for Citizen Smith. And so getting into Project 2025, it's essentially broken up into 4 sections. They talk about personnel training. And this document is available to anyone. They can go to, I think it's project2025.org. And everything is there, but it's broken up into 4 sections: personnel, training, playbook, and policy. And it's interesting that under personnel, they are accepting applications. Anyone can go online and submit their application where it says for positions in a presidential administration. Seems like they're just bypassing just a lot of really important hurdles when it comes to working for a political office, but I digress.
Well, I will tell you, that's a very clever thing that they have done, okay? Because for those who don't understand exactly how that process works on how you get people to work in an administration, the people who wrote this document will point back to the fact that in 2008, President Barack Obama had a website for people to place their resumes, their curriculum vitae, and talk about positions that they wanted to fill within that organization. And so from that standpoint, there's nothing sinister. The sinister part goes into the details of how this document is written in the image of Donald Trump to change the civil service system to one that is less nonpartisan and expert, to place a lot of people who literally will swear allegiance to that administration and to that president. And so that's one of the reasons why you have to read it. It's almost explicitly stated within the document.
You're absolutely right. His name is quoted in several places, which goes back to something that you said in the previous segment, is just making sure that people understand that it's about ideals and principles. It's not about a person. Even when I get ahead of myself, when I was having a conversation with a gentleman earlier today about we're not going to agree with every single political candidate that we see on the ballot. We're not going to like every single decision that they make.
That's right.
The important thing is to understand and see where you align with the principles that they represent.
Exactly. Exactly.
So going back to what we were talking about, so there's the personnel section and then there's training. So you can be certified in Project 2025. You can get a certificate. The certificate program is called Prepared to Serve, which I just think is hilarious. Every single instructor is from the Heritage Foundation. And they actually have a LinkedIn profile. So I'm taking this seriously. I really am, but some of this is just so ridiculous. And then there's the playbook, which talks about the roadmap to implement this conservative presidential administration within the first 180 days if a conservative president is elected.
Right, right. And make no mistake, you mentioned the Heritage Foundation. Of course, the leadership that helped draft this document comes from people who have a strong affiliation with, in the past or currently, with the Heritage Foundation. Why are they doing this now? Why is this out here for us to read? The reason that it's out there is because in the early days of 2017, after Donald Trump was inaugurated, there was pure chaos. Now, some of your listeners may say there was 4 years of chaos, but what I'm talking about is that there had been no preparation for him filling billets, the ones that are actually supposed to be appointed. And so the Heritage Foundation people who served in his administration decided to put this together. They harken back to a similar document that they put together in 1980 for President Ronald Reagan, but this one is much more expansive. And so they're trying to ensure that this time around they can hit the ground running with some pretty distasteful and horrendous policies. Absolutely,
and let's get into some of those policies. So it's broken up into 5 sections: taking the reins of government, the common defense, general welfare. Now these are titles within the document. The economy and independent regulatory agencies. One area that I found, so let's just start with section 1, taking the reins of government. It's essentially making the president king. That is the theme of section 1, taking the reins of government. One area that you mentioned before is revamping the civil service component of our employment bank.
Right.
That is extremely concerning.
It's something that President Trump tried to do during his 4 years in office. He called it Schedule F. Schedule F reclassified people from being, again, experts to being political appointees, deunionizing them, and there's a variety of places in there where we want to go through all of the executive agencies and even take away the limited power that federal government employees have in their unions, and again, make them align with and loyal to him.
Right.
And so that goes right to your point. That creates a kingdom and not a democracy.
Absolutely. And then even making I guess the ability to advance performance-based. But if it's if it's based upon someone's allegiance to a policymaker, then your ability to advance is based upon you not making decisions for the American people, but making decisions for whatever leader is in place.
Exactly. One of the tenets of the democracy is, for employment standpoint at least, in support of not only the federal government, but state governments and local governments, is that your supporting staff are in a meritocracy, not a place where they pledge allegiance to something other than that flag, to that person. Again, it gets back to, we vote for, not for personalities, not for people, but for ideas and ideals. This particular plan changes all of that. It shifts all of that. We must remember that the person that this was written for made a statement about what he would do on day one.
He did.
He said he would be a dictator.
That's right.
And this policy statement, this document of over 900 pages, helps him to do that.
Right. Even though he said that he wasn't aware of it, he said that he wasn't affiliated with it, he tried and failed to distance himself from it, but his name is in it. The people who created this document were a part of his previous administration.
Absolutely.
And as you said, he said what he was going to do.
Absolutely.
So this is what is before people on the ballot in November. Going to section 2, the common defense, just very alarming sections. Within the DoD, one area of a needed reform was to eliminate politicization, reestablish trust and accountability, and restore faith in the force. One area that I found interesting, it said reinstate service members to, and this is akin to you, reinstate service members to active duty who were discharged for not receiving the COVID vaccine, restore their appropriate rank, and provide back pay, which I found interesting. If you are a service member, your number one job is to protect those people around you and Americans, which is what the COVID vaccine did. So how much sense does it make?
It makes almost no sense. There have been requirements for military people to receive a variety of vaccines. Before I deployed to Desert Storm, for instance, quite honestly, I was inoculated with something that I didn't know what it was, but they told me it was going to be helpful and to me, and it was going to protect those that I was serving with. You know, to demonize the vaccines that were created for COVID is simply another way of stirring up a base of people who do not think very clearly about what human rights and civil rights really mean. Secondly, who do not understand that part of the sacrifice of serving the country means to conform to the things that are for the good of the organization in order to execute the mission, as opposed to being able to exercise, again, a human rights type of philosophy that just doesn't conform to what the military actually does.
Absolutely. When we come back, I want us to talk about briefly what the appeal is with this type of policy to Americans that seem to be so allegiant to the conservative candidate. Please don't go anywhere. Come right back as we continue our conversation.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Oh, Dad, wait till you see the bike we got for Jake.
Hearing loss happens gradually with age, making it easy to ignore. Yet most older Americans aren't getting their hearing tested. Untreated hearing loss can keep your loved ones from enjoying what they cherish most.
Dad, can you hear me?
Don't let that happen. Speak up about hearing loss. You'll be glad you did.
You can't buy a best friend. You can love them, pet them, care for them, whether they want you to or not. You can take a picture, you can jump, yell, you can fly to the moon, travel the world, or just stay in bed. You can't buy a best friend like that, but you can adopt one. 'Cause we're connected.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us back here on the Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation on Project 2025 with Virginia NAACP Chapter President, Reverend Cozy Bailey. When we were leaving off from the previous segment, I was asking, what is, in your opinion or your perspective, what is the appeal? There is a certain demographic within the American populace that is allegiant to the conservative candidate, to Donald. And it almost seems as if they just cannot see the forest for the trees. But there is a theme of within this policy initiative that appeals to them. What do you think? Do you think that's what the draw is?
I absolutely do. Part of the appeal of, and I'll use the term MAGA to describe the folks who this particular manifesto will absolutely appeal to, feel that they are losing their place of power and privilege within this country. And the MAGA movement, specifically with Donald Trump, has tapped into that, making them feel fear. And that's why we hear a lot about the people who espouse the MAGA movement use fear as a tactic as opposed to hope, which is a much more realistic way of looking at things, especially within a democracy. So said a different way is that in many cases, white privilege is under attack. And people get very enthusiastic about that because when you've been in a place of power for a long time and that power is challenged, and that's why when we look at, again, the deep contents of this long and dense document, we can begin to determine that some of the policies, if they were in fact created, would plunge us back into, especially in the Commonwealth of Virginia, back to the days of Jim Crow, back to the days when people who were less than really had no place within government. So I think that's part of the appeal. I think that's a main driver of the appeal.
And to justify what you're saying so that folks don't have the presumption that what you just said is inflammatory, another quote from this document, it says, again, under DOD, another policy reform is to eliminate, this is a direct quote, to eliminate Marxist indoctrination and divisive critical race theory programs and abolish newly established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and staff. The reason that we have DEI initiatives is so that the disenfranchisement, the discrimination, the robbery that took place during Jim Crow, going all the way back to Reconstruction, and that followed us up. Some of us are still dealing with that. That's why we have the Crown Act, because people are being discriminated against because of our hair. The reason that we have these policies is to make sure those things don't happen. And so I completely agree with you. People are intimidated when they think that making room for a group of people that does not look like you means erasure of another group, which is such a falsehood and is based in fear.
Exactly. And I know that came from the section about military, but even if we look in the foreword of this particular document, it talks about a plan to eliminate certain words from all government documents. And I just jotted down a couple of those words. Okay. They were eliminate from any government document, any directive, or federal contract the term sexual orientation, DEI, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, anything to deal with gender. But one that is really chilling is to eliminate any reference to reproductive health. It is just another attempt to solidify what I hope is a temporary situation on the Dobbs decision that, of course, reversed Roe v. Wade. And many people wonder, how can a Black Baptist minister be in favor of Roe v. Wade. And the reason that I and people who are like me are in favor of that is because it's about choice. It is about control of a woman's body by that woman. And the precepts and ideals of the NAACP is to fight for civil rights and human rights. That entails people being able to do the things that they make as the decision for themselves. This document would do away with that if all of these aspects were in fact implemented.
I think it's interesting that you bring up that point of choice and how you being a Black Baptist minister, people would question, well, how could you support something like that? But I believe that those of us who know how it feels, and even if we haven't personally experienced it, are dealing with the consequences of our ancestors having to deal with not having agency over our bodies. That's how we can have that perspective.
Absolutely.
That's how we can support choice. You are a man, and so you will never know what it feels like to have to make a decision on what to do with a life growing inside of you.
Absolutely not.
But because you understand what it feels like, even if to get pulled over by the police, for a split second, you don't have agency. There's a possibility that you don't have agency over your own body. That creates that sympathy when it comes to choice.
Yes. Absolutely. Alpha, I cannot add anything to that. You stated that perfectly.
Absolutely. Okay, so kind of moving further in section 2, under common defense, I want to talk about the section written on the Department of Homeland Security. And I think that Virginians will find this this area particularly interesting because it was written by one Ken Cuccinelli, the former Attorney General of Virginia. There's just so much that is completely inflammatory and concerning about this section that is written by Cuccinelli. When I saw his name, I was brought back to a moment in 2009 when he went to a church filled with Black people, pandering to Black voters. I know because I was in that room. And so for him to write this, when it comes to immigration reform, one of those reforms he's suggesting, from his own words, it says, enforcement and removal operations should be identified as being primarily responsible for enforcing civil immigration regulations, including the civil arrest, detention, and removal of immigration violators anywhere in the United States without warrant, where appropriate, subject only to the civil warrant requirements of the INA where appropriate. To me, that sounds like slave patrols.
It is in fact slave patrol. It absolutely, and I agree with your assertion that it is slave patrol. You know, he spent some time as temporary head of Citizenship and Immigration Services, and I'm assuming that that's why he was the one that they chose to write that section on the Department of Homeland Security. This document and those people who espouse the things that are in this document oversimplifies one of the most complex issues that we have. This one transcends just a negative effect on Black people. This one affects all people. Yes. As we continue to wrestle with how to deal with the fact that people from all over the world want to come to this country, that this country was built upon immigration, and that because it is still the best country in the world, we have an incredible number of people who want to come here. The way that we control that is not through more and more harsh law enforcement. It is not that simple. But again, the writers of this document and those who espouse the philosophies that are in it would oversimplify that because, again, it appeals to those people who feel that they are slipping from their power position that they have enjoyed for hundreds of years in this country.
At the detriment of people who don't look like them.
Yes.
That's the key part. Again, power isn't being taken from anyone. But the policies and the initiatives that are being put in place to cripple a certain demographic so that one group can be in power that is at the detriment of other people, that's the problem. And you brought up an interesting point when it comes to, you said it a couple of minutes ago about the importance of diversity. From a scientific perspective, when you talk biodiversity, that is what makes an environment, a biological environment, strong. Homogeneity, having a specific type or a small type of diversity within an environment, that weakens that environment, just from a purely scientific perspective. So, and I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, in the section where they talk about the Small Business Administration, taking out that diversity, small business is the backbone of this country. But you increase immigration, you prevent people from different backgrounds and different ideas and different educational areas all across the world. You will weaken our economy. You will weaken our society. That is a problem.
I agree with you. Again, 100%. This country has grown stronger and stronger and stronger based upon the recognition that that diversity strengthens our ability to get things done as opposed to weakens it. I remember in my grade school times in a history book, it said that the United States was the melting pot. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time, but I came to understand that that meant that when you come to this country, everybody melds into the same thing. I think really what this country is a gigantic bowl of vegetable soup.
Okay.
Because for each individual vegetable in there, when you boil it in the water, you maintain the taste and the firmness and the content of each one, and together it makes the greatest meal that you can get. So that's what we ought to be. We're not a melting pot.
Absolutely.
We're vegetable soup.
Absolutely. That reminds me of the story that I'm sure you've heard of it from elementary school. There's a person who was making rock soup.
Yeah.
And so someone said, oh man, it'd be nice if we had some potatoes. Someone said, I have potatoes. Someone else said, I have carrots. Someone else said, I have this, that, and the whole community was fed.
Right.
That is what that's the democracy that we're trying to build.
Right.
Exactly.
And maintain.
Yes, exactly, and not allowed to be destroyed. Okay, and then it also talks about, within Section 2, deunionization of TSA. Ridiculous. Elimination of the ombudsman offices within immigration agencies, and something else that people should find interesting with 28 seconds left, defunding of public broadcasting. Every person watching this show right now should be concerned about that. You need to go to Project 2025, look at Section 2, and talk about and read about their ideas for defunding public broadcasting. If they were allowed to do that, you could not watch this show. Our show's producer wouldn't have anything to bring you, so don't go anywhere. Come back as we finish our conversation.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Dad.
See ya, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice life. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy smile. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And thank you so much for joining us back here on the Inside Scoop as we conclude our conversation with Reverend Cozy Bailey. Reverend Bailey, I know that we're going to continue this conversation after the show because I've been having such a great time. And thank you so much for helping to unpack Project 2025. Now let's get into one of the more alarming sections of this manifesto, and that's policy reform when it comes to DOJ and the FBI.
Absolutely. Again, it takes a reading by each individual to understand what's in here. But what I wanted to highlight here is that the MAGA movement has been at war with the Department of Justice and the FBI from day one. Why? Because they keep things in check. They are the ones who ensure that if something illegal is happening at the federal level, that it will be investigated, and if necessary, it will be prosecuted. The Project 2025 precepts will weaken the DOJ and the FBI to the point that it will allow non-federal agencies or even non-state and local agencies, police agencies specifically, to be weakened to the point where militia type of organizations will rise. And we've seen in the past that there is an affinity for those types of organizations operating outside the law to help this particular person that this was written for, and that is Donald J. Trump, to pursue his ideals, his initiatives, which are largely based personally. And so we need to understand that when we vote, we understand that this is the document that is behind one of the candidates. One that, again, de-unionizes organizations that have been strengthened because they are unionized. All the federal agencies that have that, to weaken our federal law enforcement organizations, specifically the Department of Justice and FBI, in favor of organizations that will be more loyal to this one person, as opposed to protecting the people of this country.
That's right.
And it's incredibly important, again, that we not listen to the talking heads that we see on television. Alpha, you are not one of those.
I appreciate that.
But to understand for ourselves, to look at the facts and then draw our own conclusions. That's right. Not to vote for a person, but to vote for what that person is standing for. And that's how we should make our decisions.
That's right. And again, to justify what you're saying, that you're not speaking, words that you're saying are not inflammatory, again, another direct quote from this document says that they would like to, a goal is to pursue a national security agenda aimed at external state and non-state actors, not U.S. citizens exercising their constitutional rights, which sounds like immunity for militias and radicalized nationalists.
That's exactly what it sounds like. That's the conclusion that I drew when I read through it.
And that is concerning. There's nothing in this document about gun reform, gun control. It would put more guns in the hands of people. It would roll back legislation that is for common sense laws like red flag laws and background checks. It would roll those back, making our streets, making our country more dangerous.
And concepts like, common sense gun legislation, common sense gun rules, processes, and procedures are the things that this particular document disdains. And I am trying not to be inflammatory. I'm trying to just be accurate in the statements that I make as I pull that out. And hopefully those things, as you read quotes, will make people dive even more deeply, because we've only scratched the surface as deeply as we have talked about it, about what's in here. Inflammatory language is contained in this document. They have misused the term woke in a way that is, if it weren't so sad, it would be humorous.
Yeah.
The writers of this document, two or three terms they really don't understand. None of them understand what the word equity means. Mm-hmm. None of them understands what critical race theory really is, but when you ask them, they will tell you that they don't want any of it. Mm-hmm. And none of them understand what the term woke means. It incenses me and others in the way that what is now termed a conservative agenda has misused the word woke. As you and I, Alpha, know, and many of the people in your audience know, woke means to stay aware. Period. Full stop. It is not a movement. It is not a philosophy. It is just an admonition to stay aware of what's going on. And yes, it came not out of the Black Lives Movement. It came actually from the 1930s about staying aware as we were fighting Jim Crow. But it's a term that transcends and a state of mind that transcends just people of color. All of us should stay woke and be aware of what's going on so that, again, we can make informed decisions as we participate in this democracy that we have in this country.
Absolutely. You know, one thing that people say before they vote for someone, they wish after someone is in office, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known what this person stood for, or how do I know what this person is going to do? How do I know that they're going to make good on their promises? You have it right here. One of the candidates, literally, they call it a playbook. You see what they're going to do. They're writing it out. You have the opportunity to make an educated and informed decision. Just read the document. Again, under Section 3 for general welfare, one of their initiatives is to scale back the school lunch program and benefits for low-income families. I know I grew up on the school lunch program. There were times if I didn't eat at school, I wasn't going to eat all day long. You cannot learn, you cannot listen, you cannot behave on an empty stomach.
Right.
That is an important program.
That's part of perpetuating the myth of what they used to call back in the day the welfare queen. You know, in these efforts now to the terminology they use is to get able-bodied people who are receiving government assistance to constantly look for employment. It's based upon a false premise because people in general do want to be employed. People want to be self-sufficient. You know, I remember the old United Negro College Fund commercial back in the day that said, we're not looking for a handout, just a hand. And that's why we have some of the assistance programs in the government, not to provide a handout, but assistance, a hand, you know, during tough times. And sometimes tough times last for a long time. But this document ignores that. And it works to the detriment of all people.
That's right. Another thing that it says, to prohibit the FBI from engaging in activities related to combating the spread of so-called misinformation and disinformation.
That gives a license, quite frankly, for people to lie.
It does.
Yeah, and the biggest one is when you see a person stand in front of a microphone on television and say, I don't know anything about Project 2025.
FBI, you better not investigate that. Like, come on, seriously. And then going back, one more thing in Section 3, and under the Department of Labor, they want to eliminate racial classifications.
That I've had experience here, I and my colleagues in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that we are troubled by that practice that already exists. When administrations changed here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, vital statistics which help point to where the government needs to focus its efforts on serving its citizens are non-existent because there's no racial or ethnic demographic information that is collected to the degree that it is helpful. And I want to be clear, it is collected, but not to the degree that it's helpful. When I saw that, I said, they must have consulted with the current administration in Virginia to come up with that. That it defies logic that one would not use that information in the right way, again, to be a better government for the people.
Right. I think it is inflammatory and ridiculous to think that you can govern a nation or you can take out a parameter within all of policy when our entire body of policy from the beginning was based on race. You cannot make it a non-factor and non-parameter now. to say that, oh, well, I'm going to be colorblind. You can't do that. You're ignoring a group of people. You're not making everyone equal. And that is another deception of this document.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and going back to my theological training and my own spiritual beliefs, I say this quite often to folks. I believe that God made us all different in order to give us a lifelong challenge of getting together despite our differences. And so to try to ignore those or wipe those away, in my opinion, is counter to one God, our one God's plan for us all.
Absolutely.
So we need to live within that, and as opposed to trying to change reality. I am a black man. You are a black woman. You can't say that you're blind to that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point to end this show on. If folks wanted to learn more about the Virginia NAACP, the website is going to be on the screen. Please make sure you connect with Reverend Cozy and his organization to to be a part of the voter mobilization and voter education drives.
Absolutely.
Okay. VA, Virginia NAACP?
The NAACP VA.org.
Okay, so favorite part of my show, everyone already knows, it is either or. We're talking about some pretty heavy content, so we're going to take things a little bit light right now. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you let me know which one you would rather. Okay, reading a book or seeing a movie?
Oh, I love to read, but I am an old movie buff, and so I think I'd rather see a movie.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather read a book. Would you rather live in the city or live in the country?
I'd rather live in the city. Even though I live in the suburbs right now, I'd rather live in the city. I'm a city boy at heart.
Me too. I like the protections and the infrastructure of the city. Would you rather learn from education or learn from experience?
I learn from experience. I've done all the education I think that I'm going to do, but I continue to experience things that I've never experienced before, and I think it adds a richness to my life.
Absolutely. Okay. Grilled chicken or grilled steak?
I love grilled steak, but at this point in my life, grilled chicken is better for me.
I hear you. The high blood pressure is calling,
indeed.
I'm telling you. Okay, most important question here. Earth, Wind, and Fire or Frankie Beverly featuring Maze?
That one's a hard one, but I'm going to go with Frankie Beverly, okay?
For me, it would be Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. September's one of my favorite songs.
I hear you.
Thank you so much for joining us here on The Inside Scoop. Please make sure you join us next week for whoever our guests will be. Have a great evening.